My name is Heidi Swan. I'm the co-author of A Night in Jail, which is a book, a film, and a play, and it's about the relationship between marijuana and mental illness. And that's what I'll be speaking with you about today. So I am going to share my screen. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and in Washington State, it's very common for young people to start using marijuana. I began using it when I was about 12 years old. This is a picture of me later on in my teens. And I chose this picture not because it's the best picture of me or the best quality, but because it shows my teen attitude. Because when I was a teenager, I had a major attitude and I did a lot of things that got me in a lot of trouble. Like I said, I was drinking, I was smoking pot. Later on, I was smoking cigarettes. I shoplifted and all of these other things. But one of the things that saved me from myself and my teen attitude was that I got a really good education in school about sex ed. And they taught us how to not get pregnant. And that freaked me out so much that I said, I am never, ever going to take that chance, ever. And I never did. And I really appreciate that this was taught to me at a very young age. And as we go on with my speech, I'm going to make the argument that I think that we need to have the same blunt education with our teenagers about drugs and mental health so that they are equipped to make really good decisions for themselves. So one time when I was a teenager, I was getting high with my best friend in the laundry room of our family home. And all of a sudden, I had this feeling where I didn't know where I was and I didn't know who I was with. And this was really, really frightening for me. And my friend was fine, but I was not. And so because this scared me so much, I didn't do it very often. Apparently, this same experience happened to Ben Affleck when he was young. It's my belief that kids need to understand what this is. If they have a feeling where they feel like they're out of touch with reality or they're feeling paranoid, they need to understand that this is a warning sign that they should stay away from it, away from marijuana. And I'll get into more of the reasons why as we go forward. Even though that disassociative experience scared me, my brother liked it. He liked it a lot. And so he used marijuana pretty much every day from the time he was a teenager in middle school, through high school, through college, and into graduate school. And he felt fine the whole time. Now, this is a guy who came from a loving home. We came from a very good home. We had family vacations. We went to church on Sunday. We did a lot of things together as a family. We were well educated and our parents took good care of us. And my brother had friends, he had girlfriends, he had serious goals. He was somebody who was always talking about what he wanted to do when he grew up. And he had jobs and played sports. One of the things that my brother says about his teen marijuana use is that he said it made him feel like everything was fine. Everything was going to be okay. It's okay. He will do just fine on the test. He doesn't need to study that hard. It's okay. He can take out a loan to get through college because he's going to get a job later. It's okay. But the truth was, the drugs were lying to him because everything was not okay. What he really needed to do was get serious about his studying and focus on it and put all the partying aside. My brother went on to USC after college and he got his graduate degree. And he wasn't able to perform very well at this point. He finished in the bottom third of his class. And then when it came time to take the exams, he ended up not doing very well. And he took the test 3 times and he failed 3 times. So the drugs had clearly been affecting his brain, and marijuana is known to affect memory and learning. That's what we think happened with his graduate degree. So after graduate school, he says today that he moved on to cocaine, and that was much easier for him because of his years of using marijuana. It was like, oh, drugs, they're just fine. So I use pot, now I can go on to coke. And so for him, cocaine became his love of his life. And then it was crack. And then he was homeless. And this is my brother after he had gotten his graduate degree at USC. He couldn't get a job, a good job in his field, but what he did have was a raging addiction problem at this point. And so at this time in his life, he would dig ditches during the day. And then at the end of the day, he would get his drugs and go sleep underneath a freeway. He was in jail 18 times. This was heartbreaking for our family. How did a kid from this loving home, from this well-educated home, wind up in jail 18 times, living underneath a freeway? We had an intervention for him during this time, and it was awful. I can't believe that we were able to get him in a room when he was full on homeless. I mean, and he smelt so bad. He looked terrible. His hair was long. His teeth were falling out. His gums were purple. His nails were like claws. He had a film of dirt from head to toe. His clothes were like cardboard. It was, I mean, for me to see somebody on the street, living on the streets, is very, very painful. When you see your brother like that, when I saw my brother like that, it was agonizing for me, for our whole entire family. When people say addiction is a victimless crime, it is so not true. The family suffer along with the addict. At the end of 5 hours at this intervention, where we were reading our letters to him and begging him and crying for him to give up drugs, he finally said no, he's not going into treatment. And he walked out into the rain. I mean, what do? What is a family supposed to do at this point when the addict has refused treatment? So as per the agreement with our interventionist, we cut ties with him. We cut off contact with him. Many years later, I'm happy to report my brother did get off the streets, and it was not easy. I'm not going to have time to go into it today, but let me say, I don't have good advice for anyone if they have a relative who's homeless and they want to get them off the streets. We were able to do it, but it was our own way of working it out. When my brother went to see the psychiatrist to get evaluated for Social Security disability, he told her that he had been hearing voices. And this was a big surprise to me, a big surprise to all of us, because we knew he was a drug addict. We didn't know he had a serious mental illness like schizophrenia. We just thought he was crazy. We didn't know. We thought he was just drug addict crazy. We didn't know that he was seriously mentally ill on top of that. It was a few years after he got off the streets that I came across articles like this one, written by Dr. Christine Miller, who wrote a few of the articles or studies that I read. And I was shocked. What do they mean teen marijuana use is linked to psychosis? It's so common this drug is so commonly used. And we don't know this. No one knows this. And I was just really surprised. And I was like, this sounds like my brother. So the research says that the younger a person is when they start using marijuana, the greater their likelihood is to develop a mental illness like schizophrenia. So if we look at this chart here, this shows a person under the age of 15 years old using marijuana, their risk goes up 4.5 times for a serious mental illness. If they're over the age of 18, excuse me, their risk goes down. And it goes down as a person gets older. So 21 would lower the risk, etc. It doesn't take the risk away, it just lowers the risk. The research also says that the number of times a person uses marijuana in their life, that also increases the risk. So a lot of people say that of all the drugs that can cause psychosis, why would marijuana be number one on that list? It doesn't make any sense, but that is what the data says. You can see on this chart. The other thing that the research says is that it's not just the younger a person is when they start using it or the amount of times they use it, but it's also the potency of the marijuana. Now, if you look here on this chart on the bottom left, when we talk about marijuana, this is probably what everybody thinks we're talking about. Everyone thinks that we're talking about the Woodstock weed. Everybody thinks, oh, the people of my generation say, oh, I used marijuana and I was fine. And they were one of those people that didn't have a negative experience like I did. But so everybody thinks we're talking about this low potency marijuana. However, in the years, the THC has been bred to be stronger inside the plant. So it's nothing at all like what people were smoking in the 70s, the 80s, or even the 90s. And so you can see in the middle, Colorado marijuana products are at about 19%. In California, when you go to a pot shop to buy a joint, they're at about 23% THC. However, if you go to the concentrates, that's what the kids are vaping and dabbing, or the edibles, the oils, the tinctures, the mints, the cookies, all of those things are way higher by a factor. I mean, this is the average. It can 68%. It can go up to 99% THC. And so if you think back to me, back in the late 70s when I was 15, 16 years old, and I had some marijuana that was low potency, and I had this psychotic experience because that's what it's called. It's called cannabis-induced psychosis. That's the experience that I had when I was 15 in my laundry room in my house. And now imagine me today if I had a hit off a vape pen. I would be one of those kids you read about in the emergency room. I have no doubt. So I have a great amount of sympathy for young kids today because they're being told it's just pot. And it's a completely different product from what we had 40, 50 years ago. So the high potency marijuana is linked to greater risk for psychosis. This is recent data about who is using it. The top line here, the red one, this is kids 12 and older. And this is 2002 at the bottom going to 2019. So you can see the data says that first-time users are increasing and the young kids are. And so remember how dangerous this is for the risk for psychosis. The younger the use, the higher the potency, the more frequently the use. So we're just hoping that a lot of these kids didn't go on to use it more and more. And then we have 12 to 17-year-olds here, and 18 to 25, and 26 and older. But the general trajectory is use is increasing. It's gotten to be so bad that in the United Kingdom, they opened the first ever cannabis psychosis clinic. And in Colorado, they issued the first ever warning labels. This is very recent. If you look down here, you can see there may be long-term physical or mental health risks from marijuana. All right, so we've talked about psychosis and schizophrenia. What else is there? What are the other things people are experiencing? There's major depressive episode. This is kids aged 12 to 17, and this is illicit drug use. This is the people who had the major depressive episode in the dark blue. And you can see the marijuana users above opioid use, above binge drinking, above tobacco, that marijuana is higher. This study was done by some researchers who wanted to study the effects of marijuana on depression. And they had seen so much from the marijuana industry, which said, oh, it's good for depression. And so that's what they thought that they were going to find. And they were really surprised to find the opposite. They found that regular users of marijuana actually were more affected they were more depressed. That's because even a small amount of marijuana, even a small amount, has a profound effect on a teenage brain because the brain is still developing. It affects memory, and like my brother's story illustrates, it affected his ability to do well in school. It affects the GPA. It worsens anxiety disorders, and it's linked to bipolar symptoms. Finally, what all teens should really know today is that the number one substance found in teenagers who successfully killed themselves in Colorado, the number one substance is marijuana. Everyone should know this. This should be a basic part of their drug education. Now, we have a mandated drug education here in California, but it has not been updated since 1987. Now, to me, this is a crime because marijuana has been legalized in our state. And we should mandate that they get very explicit information about the risks that are specific to them, especially as it relates to mental illness. They should know. And so what we see here on this chart is if you've just used marijuana once in your life compared to never having used it, if you've used it over the past year, if you used it 200 times in the past year, this is how much your risk goes up for any mental illness, a serious mental illness, for unemployment, probation or parole, government assistance. These are all of the things that my brother's life illustrate. So pretty much everything that can go wrong with a person who uses marijuana on a regular basis did go wrong in my brother's life. So I asked him, after he became sober and was off the streets, I asked him if he would write a book with me about his life, because he was as shocked as I was to find out about the link between marijuana and mental illness. He said, if I knew marijuana would make me go crazy, I never would have tried it. And so he agreed to write this book with me. And it's a young adult novella. It's the first one of its kind, which illustrates cannabis-induced psychosis. And the plot of the story is basically that a young man gets put in jail for smoking pot, and his cellmate is a homeless drug addict with schizophrenia. And his cellmate keeps him awake all night long with his delusional rants. And by morning, the teenager's world is completely upended. We made it into a play. And so this is a performance of a staged reading that we did of it. And then following the staged reading, we had a panel discussion with experts. And I'm really proud to say that Dr. Christine Miller, who wrote that article we looked at earlier, she was on our panel, in addition to Lori Robinson, whose son died from cannabis-induced psychosis and went on to kill himself because his brain was telling him to do things that had nothing to do with reality. And so she started the first ever website called Mom Strong, where you can go and read about people's personal stories about marijuana and mental illness. And there are other really great websites as well. There's Parents Opposed to Pot, there's Every Brain Matters, and there's Johnny's Ambassadors. So those are great ones to check out. We also made it into a short film, which was a project that was led by teenagers. Just a few months ago, it was in the LA Shorts Film Festival, and we did really well. We ended up with well over 2,000 views. And we had this terrific interview that was done with us by NBC-LA about our project. And I'd like to show this 3-minute video to you now.
I'm Angie Crouch in Manhattan Beach with the story of a mentally ill, drug-addicted homeless man who made a film about his life in the hopes of preventing others from going down that same path. That story just ahead.
Who are you?
Danny.
Why are you following me?
Hey, help me.
New at 6, a new film written and produced by a South Bay brother and sister hopes to raise awareness about mental health, addiction, and homelessness. NBC4's Angie Crouch live right now in Manhattan Beach with more about this very personal story behind the film. Angie.
That's right, Colleen. Coming up at about 7 o'clock, about 200 people are expected to gather here at American Martyrs Catholic Church in Manhattan Beach for a screening of this short film. As you mentioned, it was written by a Hermosa Beach brother and sister about his troubled life on the streets with the hopes that others can help avoid the same fate. The movie A Night in Jail is a fictionalized account of the real life of Kay Anderson, a schizophrenic drug addict who cycled in and out of the criminal justice system during his 10 years while living under a bridge in Seattle, having repeated delusions.
Who are you?
Danny.
Why are you following me?
Hey, help me.
The real Kay Anderson is a college-educated man from a loving family who began using drugs as a teen, not realizing he was suffering from schizophrenia.
I thought I was in touch with the spirit world, and so of course the FBI wanted to know about the spirit world, so they were watching me.
It's too late now.
The film, written by Anderson and his sister, was shot in a garage in Hermosa Beach and at the Redondo Beach Police Department. The filmmakers hope to show the movie to high schools to educate young people about the dangers of drug use and to show that homelessness can happen to anyone.
This is a cautionary tale for teenagers. We want to prevent more homelessness.
Anderson's sister eventually convinced him to get mental help.
I started seeing a psychiatrist. I started taking anti-schizophrenic drug, and while I was under the bridge, and my delusions went away. And so suddenly I wasn't John the Baptist, I wasn't anybody special. I was just a homeless drug addict underneath a bridge.
Anderson got sober and now has a home in Desert Hot Springs. He spends his time helping others who are in recovery, full of gratitude that his sister never gave up on him.
I've got a lot of life left, and I think there's a lot of things I can do, a lot of good things I can do. And so I want to show my sister that her investment was well placed.
And tonight's screening here at the church is sponsored by MB Safe. That's a nonprofit here in Manhattan Beach that helps the homeless population. The filmmakers and experts will be holding a panel discussion after the 20-minute film is screened tonight. And they're hoping that these kind of stories can help bring attention to the need for more services. We're live in Manhattan Beach. Angie Crouch, NBC4 News.
As the interview described, we held a panel discussion after the short film. And you can see there's my brother on the panel and also LA County psychiatrist, Dr. Jeremy Martinez, who also works for homeless outreach there. So this is something that we think is really important to do anytime there's a dramatic presentation of our work, is to hold an expert panel discussion afterwards so that the science can be discussed. For my brother and I, we want to do everything we can to prevent future addiction, prevent future mental illness, if at all possible, and to prevent future homelessness. So much of this is preventable. Now, many people say that our high rates of people with mental illness on our streets is because they're so miserable living in the streets, they become addicted to drugs and they become mentally ill. But we would say that the opposite is also true, that like my brother, many people wind up living on the streets because of their addiction, because of their mental illness. One of the things that kept my brother living on the streets for so many years is because he felt like he was being followed by the CIA and that there were cameras watching him all the time. And so the only safe place that he could be to hide from them was underneath the freeway. So that helped to keep him there. And so if we walk it back even further, did my brother's use of marijuana as a teenager, did it cause him to have schizophrenia? We don't know. But looking back on it, we can say, well, we really wish he hadn't tried it. We really wish that he had done everything in his power to protect his brain, to have the best mental health for his life. If you look at the rise in homelessness in California, it goes along with the rise in the perception of safety of marijuana. Now, there's never been a study directly linking the two together, marijuana use to homelessness, but to me, it just seems like it has to be some kind of a contributing factor. I want to end on an up note. This is the two of the main filmmakers on the short film that we made. And the director, Ethan Nollander, on the left was a junior in high school when this picture was taken and this film was shot. And William Doback was our editor and cinematographer, and he was a senior in high school. And so it is our hope that we can engage kids artistically in these dramatic projects and let them learn on a different level about the relationship between marijuana and mental illness. And so let's change the education that we have for our kids and make this common knowledge for them so that they have a good chance at a healthy future. Thank you.